It's the 13th, and we got a poll up tonight. Should death by radioactive food be a crime? Because currently it is not. And let me explain that for you. South Korea, a few years ago, shipped 6 million pounds of seafood back to Japan because it was very radioactive. Nobody was charged with shipping. Now, if I take the radiation, put it in an envelope and ship it, that's terrorism. If I take the radiation, put it in food, it's not. And it's just because you need that connotations of terrorism, right? To enslave the population into self-perpetuating fears. We're all radioactive, so let's stop being afraid of it. Gerry Thomas and Billy Lee. Now, Gerry Thomas, we've covered her hundreds and hundreds of times. And she goes around doing public speaking for the nuclear industry. And in her spare time, she radiates children with cancer and kills them. She says carrot juice contains a small amount of radioactive potassium. And this is absurd to suggest that potassium has the same attributes as man-made anthropogenic radiation. And it's outrageous that people actually do that, but that is the norm. You have no agencies to turn to that are honest. They will all do the same thing to you. And Bill Lee, of course, was previously deputy chair of the United Kingdom's Government Advisory Council Committee on Radioactive Waste Management. And then Gerry Thomas, she's also on that. She's with United Nations. She's with a whole bunch of organizations, including American. She receives funding from the National Cancer Institute of the United States. She's United Kingdom. It's really something that someone like that could actually exist, but that is the norm. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Hope everybody's doing good. Fear often underpins opposition to nuclear power. In fact, now this is the apologist narrative. Most radiation is natural and life on Earth wouldn't be possible without it. Again, what they're trying to do is conflate natural stuff with man-made. This is absurdness that people like this exist and that this stuff is printed. Again, that is the norm. They actually despise you. It's social engineering, and there is no media. There's just social engineering. There actually is no media. Now, mainstream is strictly social engineering. I know that might seem impossible to some people that are not familiar, but that's actually the facts. In nuclear power, nuclear medicine, we simply harness radiation for our own use, just as we harness fire. You can't equate fire with man-made radiation. Fire will only burn as long as you have fuel there. Man-made radiation will pulse energy for millions of years. And it's lethal to all replicating cells for millions of years, whereas fire has a small lifespan, right? Only relatively high doses are harmful, they claim. That's simply not true. A single atom sequestered in your muscles, your organs, or your bones. A single atom sequestered in your muscles, your organs, and your bones is attacked by white blood cells for the rest of your life, and eventually it turns into a tumor. So I'm starting to do a lot of these. You see the lower thirds there. Fukushima Prefecture contaminated with roughly 1.4 million becquerels a kilogram in the soil in worms' feces, 60 kilometers from Meltdowns. So it's a very far distance away from the nuclear meltdowns, where these are extraordinary numbers we're talking about there. And plutonium detected all over a village 25 miles from a meltdown. So what both of those tell you and teach you is the food is not safe. You can't have safe food because a single atom will ultimately manifest into up to 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. And the claim that only relatively high doses are harmful, they've gotten more brazen with their narrative over the last couple of decades. And again, they mention potassium. They claim beer, for instance, contains a radioactive form of potassium. Potassium is not radioactive at all. In fact, where's the comparison to that one? I can't remember off the top of my head. It kind of works out that the best way to look at it is you can't make a dirty bomb or a nuclear bomb from potassium. You can't, if you fill up a stadium with potassium right to the roof, you leave a little oil there for you to walk through, there will be zilch, no adverse side effects. If you live, breathe, and sleep there for the rest of your life, there will be no adverse side effects. If you put a pound in that stadium of man-made anthropogenic materials like fuel, you can't go in the stadium without getting a lethal dose. So you can put hundreds of millions of pounds of potassium in the stadium, go live there, it can't hurt you. And for the whichever media is producing this kind of material, they should be arrested and prosecuted as monsters. Radioactive forms of potassium emit high energy gamma rays as it decays. This is absurdness. Like if I take potassium, raw potassium, because you can buy bottles of potassium over the counter anywhere, right? And I subject it to neutrons from a reactor. Yeah, now it has emitters, but that's not how it actually works, which escapes the human body. So saying high energy gamma ray escapes the human body, this is absurdness. And remember, this is the same person that treats kids for cancer, what in her words, but is actually murders the children with high energy man-made radiation. You don't treat people with cancer with potassium. Like, you know what I'm saying, like gamma rays or X-rays or neutrons. And you can't treat people with radiation, by the way. You can only kill them. For instance, radiation therapy is still one of the most important methods for treatments of cancer. This is absurdness times infinity. Only 3% of the people that get radiation treatments survive, and they usually are devastated. The cure for cancer was discovered in Canada at a university about 11 years ago, and it's called DCA. You can order it on Amazon. And it reduced all tumors by 70% in the first 3 weeks and eradicated all cancers within 3 months. And pure DCA is how I would go, but you can buy 99.9%, and you can buy it in pills and everything else. But the pure DCA, obviously, this is the stuff they're using for cancer, actual cancer. I take it as a preventative. Now, it was banned in Canada. It's just a mineral. You don't need a prescription. There's no patent on it. It's just a mineral like vitamin C, vitamin D, or zinc, or whatever. It's harmless. You take the whole bottle, there's no adverse side effects whatsoever. In fact, a chocolate bar has a bigger side effect than the entire bottle of it. And all it does is it unplates your blood and allows your blood now to work like a normal, it should, like it works like a normal young person. Let me get this sorted out. Is that even possible anymore to sort stuff out? And radiation therapy is crimes against humanity. And nuclear medicine is crimes against humanity. Radionuclides are also used to treat cancer by targeting their emitted radiation on a tumor. First off, most of the tumors are caused by radiation. From all the weapons testing, all the radiation is still falling out from weapons testing, but then we had all fuel pools and all nuclear power plants have decades of reactor cores with no containment that are still splitting the atom into the environment. And there's narratives like this is why I'm censored so heavily. But the fight has to go on, censorship or not. You know, we still got to try our best for you and everybody else on this planet to have a way forward and for the future of this planet. Despite the benefits nuclear reactors offer us, people fear the radiation they create either due to nuclear waste or accidents like Chernobyl or Fukushima. But very few people have died to the nuclear power generation or accidents. Again, the official number for Chernobyl, for instance, according to this disgusting creature known as United Nations, which is 193 militaries, is that only 34 people died. Harvard University says over 600 pilots, helicopter pilots died, for starters. And that the plumes, of course, the plumes covered, if you go look up my Chernobyl presentations on my site, what you'll end up seeing is hundreds of academic studies showing that neonates and infants worldwide were affected by Chernobyl, and that Chernobyl changed the sex ratio of all males and females in Europe, for instance, and other studies. The only way you can do that is to poison both the parents. And what sex ratio change means more males to female sex ratios, which is a smaller population. And it reduced the population too in these people. But this would have to be true, obviously, in insects and birds and animals and mammals, not just humans, all species. And of course, in one community in Fukushima, in a single month, was 12,600 people died of heart attacks compared to any other year of that month. It was a spike, and it couldn't have been just for a single month. Radioactive waste also generates no carbon dioxide. Radioactive waste is splitting the atom. That's the problem that no one seems to acknowledge for some reason. So the reactor works by splitting the fuel. And what I mean, what do you mean when you talk about splitting the atoms? Is you're creating more material than you put in. So you can put 2 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it, and distribute it out. There's 2 million cancers, 1 atom for each person. But 2 million atoms is not going to boil my glass of water. So imagine power boiling water to power 1 million homes. You are splitting atoms to accomplish this, and these atoms have a very long life. When you put this stuff in the fuel pool after 14 or 15 months, then it's still splitting the atom. This is why they're putting in the pool, because it's very hot. And hot means it's splitting the atom. The atoms are sucked up by the water, so you're getting trillions of atoms per liter. And that is evaporated out of the buildings all day long at a rate of about 120,000 liters per pool times 1,000 pools worldwide. It's invisible and you can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or touch it or feel it or pick it up. Rejecting nuclear power as a primary energy source, we risk relying on fossil fuel for longer. This, not radiation, is what puts us and the planet in the greatest dangers. Notice how they framed that narrative. This, not radiation, but it actually is radioactive fallout, is the Achilles heel for all species on the planet. And it pulses energy every second. And the reason she framed it that way is because that's the dirty secret of nuclear. It actually is global warming. And I have a good way of introducing that into the narrative. So this is one of the plume models. This is a 20-day model. And if it falls out continuously then what happens? Well, it gets sucked up by all the plants and animals and birds and species. And that ends up worldwide, right? So that starts off by exterminating the bacteria throughout your forest. All the eggs and larvae become sterilized. The insects start to become sterilized in increments. Over time, they stop reproducing and then slowly disappear. All the birds and small mammals and animals and fish dependent upon them now will disappear in increments. And when you get a decade down the road, like we are now, you see a complete annihilation of all the species. Paris, France, a barricade of armored UN vehicles await the French freedom convoy. So right now there's the United Nations. Vehicles are used in France to stop people from protesting coronavirus. Because they got these things because they're a military, see? Premier Doug Ford is pulling vaccine passports, but that's simply not true in Canada. France's Bikini Atoll of Moruroa, which is Algeria, the paradise France nuked. And the nuclear industry has nuked most of the oases, the wonderful, beautiful oases on this planet. They went out and destroyed Christmas Island, the Bikini Atolls, the French Polynesians. While Americans were testing nuclear weapons at Bikini Atoll, which is 1 million square kilometers of highly radioactive land there, the French were blowing up the tropical atolls in the French Polynesians. Once upon a time, the French were busy nuking the tropical island paradise of French Polynesia. These nuclear tests took place between 1960s and the 1990s. These were actually nuclear wars. It's the same bomb with the same radioactive fallout. In the beginning, France used Algeria as an early nuclear testing ground. It started testing in the 1962, 59 years ago, but soon had to stop as Algeria became an independent country. Before this was part of France. In response, the French looked for a new testing site and settled for the French Polynesians archipelagos. The support base for the nuclear test was housed on an atoll some 450 kilometers, 280 miles to the northwest, because they knew the radioactive fallout was dangerous. The first bomb that was exploded in the lagoon was a plutonium fission bomb. And around 110,000 people in the French Polynesians are believed to be affected by the radioactive fallout. Actually, the children, a lot of the children born there, they call them jelly babies, because they're jelly babies, but they're not actually, they don't look like humans, and they die within a few hours or days typically. The whole population of the area was radioactive. Destroyed all the beautiful oases. I mean, that's a crime beyond imagination. The most contaminating of France's nuclear tests were done between 1966 and 1974. A particularly bad incident that contaminated Tahiti occurred in 1974 when the atomic cloud took a different trajectory than planned. So when you look at the nuclear testing, list of nuclear weapons tests of France, you can see some of these years were huge numbers. So 8,000 kilotons is 8 megatons. So you're talking about, when you look at all of the testing, it's considered around 13,500 kilotons, which is 13.5 megatons. So instead of 217 nuclear weapons that they're claiming, it's actually equal to around 800 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs going off. The radioactive fallout is the equivalent of that. And then the Rainbow Warrior, which was Greenpeace, which is not Greenpeace at all, which is a lobbying group for the nuclear industry, believe it or not. A total betrayal, disorganization. And so when you see so-called non-profits showing up on all the mainstream media websites with donate buttons to them, you know that they're bought and paid for, and they're very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. Can we block the sun to fight climate change? The controversial science, controversial. Can we block the sun to fight climate change? But climate change is caused by radioactive fallout from decades and decades of testing, from dumping, from all the fuel pools, from all the waste splitting the atoms. That's what climate change actually is. A group of 60 scumbags called for a moratorium of solar geoengineering last month, including technologies such as stratospheric aerosol injection, known as SAI, involves a fleet of airplanes releasing aerosol particles which reflect sunlight back to outer space into the atmosphere, cooling down the Earth. But they're actually doing that. We call it chemtrailing. And some people are actually stupid because they don't think chemtrailing is real. 138 ski resorts alone in the United States have permits to go up and chemtrail the skies in their area to make snowfall for their mountains. You can actually buy chemtrailing seeding, cloud seeding stocks on the stock markets that are used to make rain for farmers and also to break up storm clouds so the farms harvests are not damaged. And that in Vietnam, they chemtrailed the sky for 9 years with Agent Orange. Brought to you by Monsanto, the same people that have destroyed the supermarkets and the food supply in Canada, for instance. 90% of Canada's food is GMO. And if you grow organic food when you're surrounded by GMO fields, and the pollen can blow thousands of miles, by the way, you mutate your organic food and in increments over time. So it's really despicable and utterly disgusting what this geoengineering, social engineering crews have done to our planet. And this affects all species, not just humans. So the chemtrailing, reflecting light back into the sky, has been going on non-stop for many decades now. It's not like they're gonna do it, they've been doing it. Solar aerosol injections could pose grave dangers, potentially worse than the warming it seeks to remedy. Well, first off, there's no consensus that this can solve the problems, because you got to get the radiation and that's been released from decades of nuclear testing, nuclear weapons, which is the same as a nuclear war, same radioactive fallout. You got United Kingdom spent 30 years dumping highly radioactive fuel into the Atlantic, just randomly driving around, constantly throwing it off a ship. Literally the worst thing you could ever do. And that they don't feel that there is no incentive for them to stop. There's nobody going to hold them accountable. And nobody really talks about the subject per se, like openly, and so-called popular medias. A cooler Earth means less water evaporating from its surface into the atmosphere, changing rainfall patterns. This could produce ripple effects across the world's ecosystem, which is exactly what we're seeing. But it's actually from decades of radioactive fallout. Poor coordination of aerosol releases could lead to extreme rainfall in some places and blistering droughts in others. So, triggering the spread of diseases, and stratospheric aerosol injections could also make natural catastrophes worse than they currently are. These are all things that nuclear does, by the way. A nuclear winter, during which global temperatures drop for a year due to soot clouds from nuclear-triggered fires, would be deepened by stratospheric aerosol injections. First off, the so-called nuclear winter, we had nuclear wars. For instance, the USSR's detonated, one bomb was equal to 3,800 Hiroshimas. At the same time, many countries were detonating nuclear weapons. So instead of shooting nuclear weapons at each other, they just randomly set off these explosions. But there were so many of them that were... So typically, when you look at a nuclear weapon, like the model that most countries are using is the Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 15 kiloton size nuclear weapons. So when you put that into the equation, one of their recent, like their hydrogen bombs, which is full of tritium, by the way, also doubles the capacity of its detonation. These are very destructive bombs because there's so much radioactive fallout. And they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing. Stratosphere's aerosol injection would likely rely on aerosols being consistently sprayed into the atmosphere, which is what we see every single morning. When you look up, you see the airplanes and seemingly randomly going nowhere, just spraying aerosols back and forth till we lose sight of the sky. It's a daily occurrence, right? And this is a model of Fukushima radioactive fallout, radiation covering the entire planet. So it's not like a radioactive cloud that is moving along. It's actually radiation clouds. And this is suspended all the way from the ocean floor to the upper troposphere and much higher. That's a Fukushima model. They're actually doing it. It's not that they want to do it, they're actually doing it. Stratospheric aerosol injection would likely rely on aerosols consistently sprayed in the atmosphere by fleets of airplanes, as the particles have a half-life of approximately 8 months. Nuclear has 10 half-lives. It's very interesting that they use these connotations. Satellites would be needed to coordinate the efforts and help monitor any atmospheric changes. Again, this is all actually happening constantly for many decades now. Any disaster severe enough to permanently disable the system could trigger a termination shock. If a stratospheric aerosol injection system effectively hiding global warming were suddenly removed for an extended period, the Earth could heat up by multiple degrees in a matter of decades. Once again, what they're talking about is the cover story for decades of nuclear emissions and testings. We're already seeing fires and heat waves. It's easy to link that to the radiation from, say, Fukushima, because the plumes were so much radiation that they kill the bacteria. This is something we've seen around Chernobyl, where it kills the bacteria in the forest. The forest litter doesn't break down like it typically would, and it starts accumulating. And then when you finally get lightning strikes, you end up with these massive forest fires because the forests don't break down like they normally did. You're talking about a very, very, very gobblish industry on top of that. I'll give you an example of these global warming, how savage these people actually are. Death threats anyone? Austrian professor, global warming deniers should be sentenced to death. Climate alarmist calls for burning down skeptics' homes. So if you're a skeptic, burn down your homes. Now, what do they do with skeptics of coronavirus right now? They are vilified, demonized. They're actually removed from the social networking sites on top of that, right? Militant environmentalists call for executions and decisive ecological warfare. Humans are plagues on the earth, says Attenborough, but he's actually a plague on our planet. Then you got, these are all global warming alarmists. Climate change skepticism is a sickness that must be treated, said a professor. And obviously she's not right in her head, bless her crazy heart. Global warming author says barcode everybody at birth. Yeah. U.S. domestic news roundup. U.S. senators say CIA data collections have been hidden from the public. Lawmakers. U.S. Energy Department advances a $6 billion nuclear plant program. So the U.S. Energy Department of Energies, and look at their symbol. They got an eagle, they got sunshine, they got nuclear, they got oil, they got wind, and I'm not sure what that other one is. 2 U.S. senators claimed the Central Intelligence Agency is running a secret program aimed at scooping up massive amounts of data, has been shielding it from congressional oversight, and said there's a letter, they said in a letter released on Friday. U.S. intelligence officials that an unspecified bulk collection program was operating entirely outside the statutory framework that Congress and the public believe govern these collections. So your intelligence agencies are gone rogue, and this is the way they identify people like me or you, right? And then the system that's not supposed to exist well, like claiming that nuclear weapons are going to cause the cities smoke, and that smoke, this was a single paper done by 2 guys, and then Hollywood jumped on board, United Nations jumped on board, but that narrative doesn't hold true. Because they did incinerate large parts of land masses. So, for instance, the taser bomba, which was the animosity equivalent to 3,800 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons going off at the same time, burnt about 100 kilometers of forest and land. And so that's the extreme, right, of nuclear. So if 2 countries set off 500 nuclear weapons each, it's still not going to fill the atmosphere. By the way, the atmosphere is massive. You can't block out the sun with a nuclear war, right? That's absurd to even suggest you could do that. Does great power, I mean, that's the narrative that they want you to regurgitate is, all the smoke is going to go up and block out the sun. But we have the system, the earth we live in has a system to deal with stuff like that, right? It disperses and falls back down. You got to keep the heat going for extended periods. These heat waves they're talking about are a millionth of a second, right? So when you look at throughout history, in recent history, we have many episodes of volcanic eruptions. We have now I've seen the smoke blot out the sky for 2 months at a time from fires, right? Forest fires out on the west coast. But that rains out really quickly. The first rain you have, the majority of that's going to rain out of the sky. And that will trigger rain. That will cause rain clouds. It's the same thing as going up in the sky and spraying regions. The practice of war has integrally shaped human society for millenniums. Does military power might still make right? The practice of war has integrally shaped human societies for thousands of years. And today, the preparation for war continues to guide national security policies and dominate national spending in the major powers. No, this is the weapons manufacturing has taken over key positions in the militaries of different countries and are robbing the countries. So, what's the point of having nuclear weapons? Because you can't use them. You're not going to use them. You're not going to have a nuclear war. And during the peak of nuclear testing, because a lot of these were megaton weapons, hydrogen bombs, many countries were setting off nuclear weapons with very, very incredible high yields. And because when they talk about how you're going to blow up a city and incinerate the city. You actually, what that means is, see, like a slow burn, your all this material is released in heavy particulates, right? But they don't travel high. In a nuclear detonation, you're talking about millions of degrees. It's actually incinerated. So the fallout is rapid, it's very quick, and it's linear type fallout. Right? And so a nuclear weapon is, because there's so much power, it incinerates, it doesn't burn. Yeah, there's burning on the outskirts, but that's immediately dealt with, right? We have the technology today. We send in the big water bombers and everything to put these things out. Are we not going to deploy that if we do have a nuclear war after? Of course we are. The dropping of the atomic bombs on the Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ushered in an unparalleled era of destructive weapons. Eager to harness the strategic advantages of this new weapon, the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a decade of intense arm racing to build the hydrogen bomb and then advanced delivery systems. And by the end of the 1950s, the condition entirely new in a long history of militarism became clear. The potential capacity for increasing violence is maxed out. Humankind has achieved the ominous abilities to induce omnicide, to exterminate all species on the planet. And I mean, there really isn't anything stupider than these things. Up in the stratosphere, they're very inefficient and burning the fuel. They burn an absurd amount of fuel high up in the atmosphere. Very devastating to the entire planet emissions. And they're up there all the time, right? Solar and wind power are key to decarbonizing Switzerland. This was a study that looked at 7 ways to decarbonize, so-called. The word decarbonize this is not how this works. You got to denuclearize. You got to get the radiation, the massive amount of radiation out of the environment. Radiation is your problem. Let me show it to you what I mean. You see, because forest fire smoke is very visible, very high particles, but they only travel a certain distance, right? But nuclear, this is a 16-day model of radiation fallout from Japan. And as you can see, at the end of the 16 days, it covers the entire planet. Not a bit of the planet or parts of the planet, but the entire planet. And so look at this model right there. That's only 16 days. The nuclear meltdowns are still melting down, still heavy emissions, but you can't see it, right? You can't taste it or hear it or feel it or touch it or pick it up. But it's actually real. It's happened. There are many models to articulate that. The increases of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is the main driver of global warming. No, radiation is the main driver of global warming. And what I mean by that is, if this was greenhouse gases, first off, gas, oil, and coal emissions don't make plumes that cover the planet. Gas, oil, and coal emissions don't pulse energy every second for millions of years. The only thing that does that is nuclear. Nuclear pulses energy every second for millions of years. And we're always adding to this. This is Fukushima, for instance. But Fukushima didn't stop, so neither did that. Now, all the fuel pools, there's over 1,000 so-called fuel pools with decades of reactor cores in each pool, because we don't have a repository anywhere on the planet. So they store a lot of the fuel because it's still splitting the atom, which it will for thousands and thousands of years, or millions of years in many cases, is contributing to this. So you got 1,000 fuel pools worldwide, hemorrhaging radiation constantly, But you can't see it or smell it or hear it or touch it. But it's actually real. So for Switzerland, they determined solar and wind would solve their... And then if you use solar and wind with pumped hydro and compressed air storage. So compressed air is where you take mine shafts and you pressurize the air down into the mine shaft. And then you release that. Because it's compressed, you have a lot of air stored there. When it comes up, you're uncompressing it. And you can use a bit of gas to heat it up to make it expand even more, to give it incredible longevity from the storage. But you can back all of that up with geothermal energy because it's not dependent upon elements. And you can also back that up because that's 24-hour power, right? And you can have 24-hour power with tide. So you have these tidal turbines, and you can predict the tide for 1,000 years down the road, to the second. So that would solve your actual renewable issues immediately. But you can't just do it with one system. You need, if you use six of those systems, so wind and solar, backed up by pumped hydro and compressed air, for storage, backed up again, are all used at the same time in conjunction with each other with geothermal and tidal power. There's your solution for countries that are on the ocean, for instance. And if you put your windmills on the mountains, where the wind blows all the time, you wouldn't need storage now, would you? Wildfire worries dominate discussion of Rocky Flats refuge. And this is something we talk about quite regularly over the years, not all the time, but regularly, how these legacy sites from Cold War, where they dumped radiation in the ground, and this is sucked up by all the trees and bushes and plants, and then you have fire go through this area and liberate the stuff back into the environment, because you can't destroy radiation. You can't burn it and destroy it. All you do is liberate it back into the environment. Rocky Flats is burned down before, and Rocky Flats will burn again in the future. Those are just facts, and you can't stop wildfires, as we all know. In fact, the refuge has experienced a dozen fires since 2000. And fire is not uncommon. We basically have one wildfire every year. That is the reality. And radiological contamination are buried beneath at least 3 feet of clean soil, they claim. But that's not, well, that's true for some of it, but all the plants and animals and even the pollen in Rocky Flats is radioactive, right? And because it's in the ground, it's in the water tables, it was all these they didn't care about the environment when they were making the weapons. They were like, oh, no, we got to make this stuff because the Ruskies are going to get us, or the Soviets are going to get us. And so these are weapons you can't even use without destroying the ecosystem. If there was a fire at Rocky Flats, it is very likely the radioactive contamination will become airborne and put those living nearby and downwind, there's no such thing as downwind, at risk of downriver, but not downwind, of inhaling airborne plutonium particles. And that's where, as far as I can tell, that's where the downwind came from, was all nuclear power and nuclear generating sites and weapon sites are typically built on a river uphill. So it runs down into the river. But they also released it in the rivers for many, many decades. And that river flows down through all kinds of communities. They're severely impacted because you use it for drinking and laundry and recreation and fishing and everything else. And so they got rid of the word downriver and replaced it with downwinders. And so now people think the wind only blows one way. Gamma radiation markets 2022 dynamics. gamma irradiation, like they use for irradiating food. They call it to get rid of bacteria that causes decay of food and give it a long shelf life. But now you're eating radioactive food. So you can't irradiate something without making it radioactive. This is why all the chemo patients die. And not only that, it destroys all your other organs, as we've done presentations on with our academic studies to articulate that one. Campaign group opposing Hinkley Point C mud dump secures judicial review. So these are dredges, boat you're looking at there. What's going on? We've covered this many times over the years. Campaign group said that millions of tons of contaminated mud, radioactive mud, and radioactive sediment will contaminate the waters and beaches used by local communities, which is 100% true. Not only that, Hinkley Point is surrounded by farms. And so if you eat the food, you're going to get sick and die eventually from radiation poisoning. And that is the norm, by the way. I'll give you an example of that quickly. Here's Sizewell C that they're going to build, and the other one is in farmland, surrounded by farms. This is something we noticed was all these farms, nuclear power plants were built in all these farm countries because they're always emitting radiation, they poison the food. And so this is not an accident, right? That's Sizewell there, I think. This is not an accident that they're built in farmland, because the majority of nuclear power plants are built in farmlands. So the food is 100% going to become radioactive. That's a future nuclear power plant. That's Sizewell C there, I think. Surrounded as far as you can see by farmland. Always built in prime farmland. In fact, the Japanese harvest the food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. Try making that up on your own. Option to dump wastewater is not an option. This is Holtec is a new decommissioning service, and what they want to do is dump the water rather than store it. So it is a circus, right? Roa's famous seaside resort likened to Chernobyl. Again, Chernobyl is a nuclear wasteland. A huge road broken out after a famous British seaside resort was condemned as being so run down it looked like Chernobyl, an area abandoned after a devastating nuclear meltdown. Okay, so that's twice we brought up Chernobyl. Then that means I got to show you a little tiny bit of documentation about Chernobyl fallout to give you some context. Woe is me. Now, I spent Thursday, Friday, and Saturday out in the woods doing research expeditions. I put up 2 videos on my site, screwed up the beginning audio on the last video. Screwed up the last video, just a few seconds on the front and the end of the video. But I took you along basically for the expedition. And in 3 days we found a total of 2 little tawny birds. Both of those, one was within 1.8 kilometers of a community, so it's easy for him to make it to the bird feeders. And the other one was right along a couple of 100 feet away from a bunch of cabins that had bird feeders. Okay, so first thing to remember about Chernobyl fallout was that they closed 9,000 farms in Ireland and Scotland, United Kingdom, for decades. And because of radioactive fallout, and that's 3,000 miles away from ground zero. So I'm going to run through, very quick as I can here, a bunch of studies on Chernobyl fallout to give you context of what fallout is actually truly all about. The influence of post-Chernobyl fallout on birth defects and abortion rates in Austria. Of influence of post-Chernobyl fallout, I've just done that one day now. Trends in the human sex odds at birth in Europe and the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. So Europe got covered and changed the sex ratio of males and females. Prenatal loss to 400 males in the Czech Republic because of Chernobyl fallout. Secondary sex ratio and trends in associate gender-specific births near nuclear facilities in France and Germany. So they showed just being around a nuclear power plant, there was a huge increase of males to females. Non-thyroid cancers in northern Ukraine and post-Chernobyl. They're not doing all these studies because they're bored. They're doing it because they know this is what they're going to find. Congenital abnormality registry in Belarus, which is full of orphanages for abandoned children because of their deformities from Chernobyl. Fallout from the Chernobyl accident, overall cancer in Finland. Down syndrome, time clustering linked with Chernobyl. Non-thyroid cancers in Belarusian residents. Chernobyl fallout prenatal mortalities, England and Wales. Chromosome aberrations, Norwegian reindeers. 256 assessment of the influence of Chernobyl on birth defects and abortion rates in Austria. Estimated lifetime effective doses to hunters and their families in Sweden from radiation from Chernobyl. Difference in effects of radiation on abundance of animals in Fukushima and Chernobyl. And then the scumbag we talked about earlier, Gerry Thomas, and some people call her Gerry Thomas. She produced a study by herself, of course, saying there was no adverse effects on the children in Chernobyl. But all these other studies, so there was effects everywhere else, but not ground zero is what she's saying. This is absurdness, by the way. It's criminal what she's doing. Incidences of legal abortions in Sweden after Chernobyl. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth. Legally induced abortions in Denmark after Chernobyl. Pregnancy outcome in Finland after Chernobyl. Delayed effects of accidental radiation exposure. 15-year follow-up after Chernobyl. Pregnancy outcome in Norway after Chernobyl. Early infant mortality in Germany before and after Chernobyl. Trends in birth and birth sex ratio in the vicinity of just small research reactors showed incredible discrepancies. Human sex ratio at birth and residential proximity to nuclear facilities in France. So if you live anywhere within 100 miles of these disease factories, you are going to get hurt, and your loved ones and your children will too. And there's seemingly an unbelievable amount of documentation that anybody can find this. And so the question is, why don't we see anybody acknowledging all of these studies? Because when you gather them up and you compile them like I've got done, they really do tell a story, don't they? They tell the real story, not the fake story. And I have thousands and thousands, and I have tens of thousands of studies. Also, even schizophrenia in the aftermath of Chernobyl. Down syndrome, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, heart problems, liver problems, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. The list is so long, it's just bizarre. So most people just think of cancer, but that's a very closed way of thinking of radiation fallout. And so I don't know if you noticed it, but I'm incredibly burnt out from the research expeditions. And the show was originally scheduled to start an hour before it did, but I just didn't have the energy. I had to wait for another hour, get another cup of tea into me, blah, blah, blah. just to try to bring myself around before. I wasn't sure I could do a show tonight, and I'm still not. But unfortunately, nuclear doesn't leave us a choice. We don't really have a choice. Sick or not, we still got to try to do the best I can, right? And then we're going to get a snowstorm tomorrow, about 35 centimeters, so over a foot of snow. So those trails, the reason I done the research expeditions was because we had torrential rain last week, which was extraordinary for where I'm to. And now it's going to get back down to -20 again, heavy snow. But it gave us a few days to get out on the trail and that we normally could never access because of snowfall, right? And now you won't be able to probably get back out there till 3 months down the road. So we had to seize up on that, and that basically bankrupted the resources I had to pull this off. And to go out and only find 2 birds and 1 little martin. I'm assuming it was a martin. I couldn't get close to it to tell you for sure. It didn't have a long body like a weasel. It's just a very short body. So I'm assuming it was a martin. But it's still amazing to see it. And 2 little tiny birds. Just burnt out from all of that. But I went for it. That was the right thing to do, right? That's 100% was the right thing to do. Yeah, anyway, keep going here. Preliminary assembly, BNCT unit for cancer treatment. And this is in Russia. First off, I just showed you a bunch of studies on Chernobyl. I can show you equal amount of studies on how radiation destroys all your other organs. So you're going to get radiation treatment per se at these places. So if you got a tumor here, you end up now with tumors everywhere because you can't destroy cancer with more cancer-causing materials. That's all radiation does, is it destroys the ability of the body to fight cancer. There's only 3%. Let me bring up that study for you. That was repeated study. Just give me a second. Sometimes I'm pretty quick at this stuff. Sometimes not so quick. I wanted to go back out on the trail again today because we know the weather is going to be gone, but we're going to have to do a fundraiser sometime in the week to get back into shape again, that we're able to seize upon this. Where's that study to? Hang on. I know where it's typically to, but there it is. Right. And so there's a lot to this equation that I won't cover, but so this study, it was a 3% efficiency of chemotherapy, was originally the original conclusion based on facts, 1985, was revalidated in 2004. It only showed a 3% survival rate, estimated 2.3% in Australia and 2.1% in the United States. To justify the continued funding and availability of drugs used in chemotherapy, rigorous evaluation of the cost effectiveness and impact on the quality of life is urgently required. What the 3% is the typical misdiagnosis when it comes to this also. So they probably didn't even have cancer in the first place. So if you go to a casino and they tell you your chance of winning was, if you're from Australia, 2.3%, and in America, 2.1%, how much money are you going to gamble? Well, shouldn't you have that same equation for cancer? Which is usually caused by radioactive fallout, eating the radioactive food from the farms that are within 100 miles of nuclear power plants that are typically built in farmland. Plan to start pre-assembly of the part of the accelerator complex for cancer treatment. These are parasites, the people that use this. This is voodoo. In fact, these studies says it's better not to have anything than it is to chemo. You have a much better chance of beating cancer and surviving it naturally than you'll ever have by being murdered with radiation. It's a staggering, incredibly staggering, frightening. Oil surges to $95, Ukraine tension, right? So it could, what we see going on for many years was Russia and America and China use each other as a boogeyman. So this was a good way to jack up the price on oil by posturing, claiming Russia is going to invade nuclear wasteland and invade and take over the country. Look, it's none of our business anyway. It's a nuclear wasteland. They can have it. Macron announced a plan to protect the Antarctic at One Ocean Summit, which is the French puppet they call a president, right? French President Emmanuel Macron Department on Friday announced new plans by the United States and France to protect the environment. This is absurdness. We've done the research expeditions in both the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean due to Fukushima radioactive fallout. And the only way I can describe it is with the facts that this is an extinction level event. And so they have scumbag France. France is a degenerate pro-nuclear scumbag government, same as the Americans. I love the Americans, I love French people, but the governments and the universities and the medias in these countries are revolting. Right? There really should be a civil war to deal with these entities and exterminate them before they exterminate everything. Political leaders around the world are keen to burnish their environmental credentials in the wake of recent climate change protest movements, which was stroked up by the constipated parties, United Nations, which is 193 militaries. We lost the planet to the military-industrial complex at this stage, and they're just annihilating all the species and us at the same time. Yeah. Keep it rolling there. Leaders unite, and so the One Ocean Summit is going on as we speak, I think. Leaders unite on marine protection on One Ocean Summit in France. That's simply never going to be true. If that was true, they would look at the research that I've done first. Commitments from the One Ocean Summit will be discussed again at UN. First off, why is everybody being ruled by United Nations? They don't have sovereignty over anybody's country, by the way. But they put people in the key positions in those countries to make the policies changes that this United Nations, which is a global takeover of our planet, has exterminated most of the species and now has humans in their sights. Controlled burns scheduled at Oak Ridge Reservation. Now, in that story, it's very difficult to find the word nuclear. Only once in the whole story did we see nuclear. Department of Energy, Department of Energy, Department of Energy, Department of Energy, which is nuclear. Oak Ridge is 100% nuclear. That's all they do there is nuclear. Beginning this week and continuing through mid-April 2021, which I'm not sure if that's a slip, as weather permits, controlled burns will take place. And these are huge at a nuclear wasteland. This is why they only had the word nuclear there once, and that was right here in one of these. But you can see 285 acres of grass and shrubs. So think of the story earlier of Rocky Flats. And so they're just going to burn the contaminated material and release it into the environment. So they only mention nuclear once in the entire story. Snowpiercer's newest survivor. So this is a TV series. We've covered the story before. And the show starts off showing nuclear missiles going up into the sky and detonating. And they claim the radioactive fallout caused the sky to disappear, or the sun to disappear. And we had someone talk about that earlier in the comments section, right? Which is probably from this show promoters. And that the soot went up and blocked out the sun, and so Snowpiercer is a train circling the planet. So the show was based upon a single study that was seized upon by the scumbags at United Nations and other major institutes for the nuclear industry, and has been weaponized now against the planet to trick them into ignoring radioactive fallout and only think of soot from fires. That's what it's really all about. So they have a new player who they found in a hazmat suit. Was discovered a survivor in a hazmat suit. And as they conversed, they admitted the bunker was a nuclear facility that she was living in, and that she was a nuclear technician. So they got a nuclear technician on the train. The whole story is nutty as it gets. Eventually, the high radiation levels in the plant poisoned them all, killing many of the group members. And with the ensuing cold and lack of food, making living conditions unbearable, not because they have a nuclear winter, say, is what they're claiming. So it's an agenda, right? Because we already had nuclear wars. They call it nuclear testing. And they incinerated forest after forest. They incinerated entire islands. They incinerated entire countrysides with nuclear weapons. And it rains out quite quickly, the smoke in that, because they're huge particles. But the radiation atoms, with the isotopes, are not. And because they're like little nuclear engines, they stay suspended. They're liberated back into the environment perpetually through forest fires and stuff like that. And did they talk about the nephew got thyroid cancer? So thyroid cancer is, again, one of the perpetual lies of the industries. Yeah, you get thyroid cancer 100%. But what they don't tell you is that the thyroid takes the majority of the gamma radiation. It also sucks up beta and alpha too, and neutrons. But gamma really gets attracted like iodines and cesium. Cesium also goes into the thyroids of animals and insects and birds and mammals, not just humans. And then it's converted into radioactive hormones, truly insidiously. And this is why you see incredible amounts of neonates and infants' congenital malformations throughout Japan. You're seeing 14,200 newborns that need per 100,000, which is 14.2%, 14,200 per 100,000 newborns across the entire country need open heart surgery. That's because of the radiation. This is absurdness. radiation scans and pregnant women with cancer is safe. This is madness. Pregnant women with cancer. My God. We've lost the planet to monsters and demons. Japan. The studies out of Japan. That should frighten everybody. It should frighten the living daylights out of everybody on the planet. Really, that should frighten the living. I mean, when you think about that, if that doesn't frighten the daylights out of you, that they're using radiation and claiming that it's harmless. It doesn't work that way. Studies have shown that neonates or preterm babies that are radiated twice have a 50% chance of not being able to graduate from school and having incredible disabilities with just 2 x-rays. And these machines they're talking about are very, very much more powerful. The whole industry is goblins. And the crazies are always out in full stream, I notice, on the weekends. Time to bring back Indian Point. This is most likely Environmental Progress wrote the article. Even though you got 3 people got their name on the article. And they show you stuff that has nothing to do with the story. That's Indian Point. Now, Indian Point, within a month or something, it'll be... And within 1 month, you won't be able to turn it on again, right? So now they're pushing for it before the time runs out. Oh, hang on. Well, I got no idea what I got done with that. Oh well, we'll move on. Well, in Indian Point, I was looking for my Indian Point. Don't matter. Let's keep going. Yeah, Indian Point is a genocide machine when it comes to marine life. It kills trillions of baby fish each year. It kills 17 million adult fish a year. New Jersey kills around 9 million adult fish a year. But it kills trillions of baby fish, and the death of the baby fish is considered the reason for the collapse along the coastlines of the Atlantic. The reliability crunch has been exacerbated by recent closures of Indian Point nuclear plant, which was providing 1/4 of New York City's and Westchester's electricity and 80% of the clean electricity in downstate New York. And right, so when you take the fuel out, it's still splitting the atoms to create that much energy. That's released into the environment, exterminating all the vulnerable species in increments over time. And these are lunatics. Now, the people that wrote the article, Spector is an engineer who focuses on nuclear safety, and he's in many positions, including nuclear regulatories and the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is United Nations. And the other one is an energy and climate professional. And Rothberg is a professor at Queen's College where he taught climate change, like James Hansen. And climate change, right, so-called scientists, That whole position was created to promote nuclear power, which is what you see there. Highest energy light ever detected from Jupiter spotted by scientists. First off, the last thing they need to be looking at is Jupiter or any other planet. Like, what we should be doing is trying to stop them from getting off the planet until they fix the planet, until they fix all the nuclear dumps in the ocean, until they fix Fukushima, until they fix Mayak, until they fix Santa Susana nuclear meltdowns with the sodium reactor that was considered 460 times worse. And I seen how the pro-nuclear came through here tonight. We have a poll. Should death by radioactive food be a crime? Because currently it's not. How crazy is that? We got 89% and 54 votes, and 11% said no, which is amazing. Why wouldn't you want it to be a crime to kill people with radioactive food? How is that a bad idea? Using NASA, of course, who gave us the despicable James Hansen, the crazy lunatic James Hansen. So they spotted a light in Jupiter. They spent all that money and time and energy and resources, and they won't fix their own planet. DPP sacrifices Taiwan's people's interests by lifting a ban on Japan's nuclear food for political gain. That's an appropriate description of it. Lifting the ban on Japanese nuclear food. Right, and so the DPP, which is the political party in Taiwan, just randomly lifted the ban, same as the United States done it, except when the United States done it, the United States media didn't report on it. When Canada done it, Canada's media didn't report on it. And Canada done it 93 days after the nuclear meltdown started, by the way. That should make you sick for the rest of your life thinking about that one. And that Europe didn't report on it, but Japan did. Japan reported on America, Canada, and the United States, but the local medias didn't. Just Japan media gloating. But Taiwan media did report on it. The surprise lifting of a ban on importing food from 5 prefectures. 5. And most of the world had a ban from 14 prefectures. And as you can see to your left, I got it mapped out for you. I got to find my spot again now. Okay. And so here you see the Japanese farmer harvesting food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. This picture was from mainstream media from Japan, criticizing people for worrying about the radiation. But 55 countries worldwide banned food from half of Japan, from 14 prefectures. So it wasn't just the Fukushima prefecture. After being banned for more than a decade, nuclear food, as it is known by Taiwan's people, will finally be allowed to return to the island's dinner table, which is regarded by local media and observers as another betrayal of the public by the DPP authority. Importing toxic food. The DPP has engaged in countless cunning political calculations against the interests of the Taiwan people, against the will of the people of the island, and negatively impacting the public health and safety. And they have a long history of Taiwan doing stuff like this. Taiwan's nuclear dump is on Orchard Island, and Orchard Island is where they got all the natives segregated to. So they wanted to put a nuclear dump on Orchard Island. They went to the natives and said, we want to build a canning factory for food. Can we get a piece of your land? And the natives were like, great, that's a great idea, sure. And so they set up their nuclear dump, and they called it a canning factory for food. But it wasn't for food. It's a nuclear dump. If you don't think that's insane, what actually is? But the same nuclear industry that done that had 2,000 nuclear students in universities when Fukushima happened, and they were all ordered to go online and convince people that Fukushima wasn't bad. And they done that by claiming that it was like a banana, it was like a potato chip, the radioactive fallout was harmless, like sleeping next to somebody or climbing a mountain, that it was completely harmless when it's absolutely unequivocally not. Nuclear students, first job before they graduated was to go out and lie to the entire planet. So Taiwan should arrest everybody in the nuclear industry and publicly execute them as an incentive for them, the rest of the nuclear industry, not to be evil. As far as I'm concerned, every country should do that because we can prove why. These people that are out there perpetuating the lies should, by law, be publicly irradiated until they died. Is messing up Taiwan with fascist-like deeds. Taiwan has been destroyed by the nuclear industry in increments now. Following the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster caused by, and they just dropped. Normally they'll mention earthquake and tsunami. Every article, but this is one of the very few where they cut that out. Look. Taiwan authorities banned food imports from Fukushima for over a decade. Well, it was 5 prefectures, not just Fukushima. In 2018, the island held an anti-nuclear food referendum where the Taiwan people supported the existing ban with almost 8 million votes. However, the sudden announcement, because it caught everybody by surprise, that DPP authority to lift the ban is not a change in public opinion in Taiwan. Japan Times said that the island's leader prioritized Japan-related food issues and trying to win Japan's support for Taiwan's entry into the comprehensive and progressive agreement for this grandiose Trans-Pacific Partnership. So you poison everybody in your country so you can save money on trade. If that's not evil, what is? If that's not a crime, what actually is? And if the country is not going to hold these people accountable, what's the point of having your country? You're not a country. If you're not going to hold them accountable for doing that, what's the point of having your country? What's the point of having laws? What's the point of having a judge? What's the point of having a future, trying to have a future, if you're just going to murder everybody in increments, constantly eating radioactive food day in, day out? And a lot of people don't know any better. They're not going to check the labels. And the labeling will be in very tiny print, I can assure you, that even the sharpest eyes won't be able to read without some help. It's not a betrayal, it's genocide. It's actually the definition of evil. It's hard to imagine that people would do something like that. The KMT revealed that the poll only used Japanese food as a substitute, failed to mention the radiation risk associated with such food on top of that. The DPP even released a so-called poll on February 9th, indicating almost 60% of the public supported the distribution of Fukushima food. Why would you support food from a nuclear wasteland? Nobody would, except for extraordinarily evil group of people that were in a positions to make that decision. That's the definition of evil when you do something like that. Taiwan's admittance, a likely topic on the Trans-Pacific Partnership Commission agenda Thursday because they're importing food from a nuclear wasteland. Taiwan's Top trade negotiators said lifting a ban on Fukushima food boosts the chances to win ticket to the import Asia-Pacific trade bloc. So you're not doing yourself no favor. You poison everybody and then you can make money on trade. Literally the definition of stupid. Literally the definition of evil. That's the definition of evil. And a definition of a crime on top of that. Taiwan's opposition, KMT, goes on Fukushima food ban offensive. Taking pictures of... It's absurd that you would import food from a nuclear wasteland. I can't wrap my mind around that kind of evilness. MPP concerned over carcinogenic isotopes as Taiwan plans to unban the Fukushima food. Well, Taiwan's not doing it. A very tiny handful of people did. Same as they done in Canada, same as they done in the States, same as a tiny group in Europe done it recently. Evil is supposed to be challenged, not ignored, okay? I don't run myself into the ground every day of the week, year after year, because I'm bored. New Power Party asked the government to put strontium-90 on a watch list for its cancer-causing potential. Well, that's a rare occasion when they mention beta. But you should be checking for uranium and plutonium because that's what the reactors are running on. And the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel, because all the fuel pools melted down, remember, is CoRWM isotopes. And CoRWM isotopes need lead shielding that's 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. Plutonium is named after the devil because it's so dangerous. So how bad is CoRWM when you need lead shielding 20 times thicker? And so if you're going to eat it day in, day out, because it's going to go cheaper, right? It's going to be sold cheaper than the indigenous product. And that means poor people and children in particular, who are 100 times more vulnerable than an adult, are going to be eating it daily, bioaccumulating it. The ultimate betrayal. The ultimate evil, really, is the nuclear industry. It's hard to imagine anything more eviler than nuclear. KMT says food ban reversal hurts children. Yeah, because children are 100 times more vulnerable. So Taiwan hates their children, obviously. The Chinese National Party yesterday criticized the government's plan to lift a ban on most food imports from Japan's Fukushima prefectures and surrounding areas, saying the proposal was full of rough edges and could not guarantee children's health. No, you guarantee them to kill them in increments over time, is what you guarantee, because you won't give children alcohol, you won't give children cigarettes, you're not going to give children drugs, right, prohibitive drugs. So why would you give them nuclear, which has no redeeming qualities whatsoever? The DPP is the one being clueless, defending the wrong policy by distorting facts. And that's exactly what the nuclear industry distorts it. Well, we've seen Gerry Thomas at the very beginning of it, right? Tokyo game bashers eerily silent on Beijing's genocide Olympics. No, we bashed Tokyo because they were having Olympics in a nuclear wasteland, you sack of excrement, you. What Tokyo critics who stay silent in the Beijing Olympics fail to recognize is that, unlike in Japan, no one in the PRC has the freedom to criticize their government, which is true. But Japan had the games in a nuclear wasteland where you're breathing the air is enough to make you sick for the rest of your life. This is the athletes being... This is madness. Where's it to? Oh, yeah. The the Four Correspondents Club of Japan, which we've called out several hundred times over the last decade, the Olympic Village of Japan bashing changed its logo into the shape of the Tokyo 2020 logo, warped into a stylized coronavirus. Just what kind of craziness is that? That's an Olympic athlete trying to get into the venue, but they got to spray the shit out of them first. Disinfecting participants. Welcome to Beijing. Slave. Scotland on Sundar readers' letters. Using nuclear power to meet our energy needs is dangerous. Well, in Ireland it's illegal, right? And same as Australia, where it's legislated as illegal, as a crime. And now that the people that created those legislations are not in power, nuclear industry has got themselves into positions to change those laws. It's traitors and sedition. Abandoned gas masks on the floor in a school in the deserted town of Pripyat, adjacent to Chernobyl. Picture didn't show up. Like all nuclear reactors that produce deadly radioactive waste will remain lethal for over 50,000 years. We don't have a clue of how to store it safely. Well, it's splitting the atoms into the environment. You shouldn't live within 1,000 miles of a nuclear power plant. In fact, you shouldn't even live on the same planet as a nuclear power plant. When you actually look at the silence, you don't want to go to a planet where there's a nuclear power plant. Unfortunately, this is our only planet, right? Firm plans Japan's first nuclear fusion power plant. That's obviously a protester, I'm assuming. And that's I really like that, right? They got all the animals painted on a big balloon and turned it into an Earth. It's a brilliant, incredibly brilliant idea, and everything is radioactive. The problem is everything is hemorrhaging from the nuclear power plants all the time. Windmills are killing machines. The nuclear industry is crazy. Almost no birds died in collisions with wind turbine blades, research finds. Birds are not stupid. If you can find a bird out in the forest, first off, good luck. Second off, you'll see them zipping through trees at high speeds, chasing their meals. But they can't navigate around a big, stupid windmill. But that's the nuclear industry for you, trying to distort the facts, right? Research that looked at the number of birds crashing into wind turbines have revealed almost all found a way to avoid the fatal impact. Yeah, because they're not stupid. Birds are not actually blind. I know that sounds crazy, but they're not actually blind. French Macron has announced the construction of 6 nuclear reactors on the outskirts of Italy, which is right on the border of France, right? So they put their reactors as close as they can to Italy. Just demonic. It's demonic to do something like that. So everything runs downhill into Italy territory. To tackle the energy crisis in Europe, this is craziness. The International Energy Agency announced last month that renewables will be at around 4,800 gigawatts by 2026, in about 4 years. That's the equivalent of 5,500 nuclear power plants running at full steam. So why would you bother with nuclear when you could do it with renewables way quicker, way cheaper, way more effectively, create more jobs, and it's more sustainable, and it doesn't poison all the species. Taiwan's emittance a likely topic. We already covered that one, didn't we? Yeah. Leaders, when it comes to nuclear power, we are playing with fire. Letter, when it comes to nuclear power, we are playing with fire. A recent Tribune had a long article about nuclear power and many states considering adopting it as a way to cut pollution for the future. Although I have no doubt nuclear plants can be built safer, they still haven't addressed the issue of how to store the radioactive waste that is generated. First off, you can't. There is no such thing as it does. What does safe mean, right? Because reactors are always emitting radiation. That's the hidden truth and facts of it. And in order to produce the fuel for nuclear power plants, just the power plant infrastructure, the carbon that goes into it, you need 2 coal plants, oil, gas, or coal to run a nuclear power plant, dedicated to build it, dedicated to run it, dedicated for 60 or 100 years to decommission it. Then every facet of it is incredibly carbon intensive for extended periods. $4,800 gigawatts is what they were talking about by 2026 for renewables. The first part of the article made it clear the benefit of nuclear power. It was not until the last part of the article about the disadvantages of the nuclear power, which you rarely see in the same article. It framed it as environmentalist complaint, possibly alarmist, overreacting because it won't happen. It must not be taken seriously by the general public. May be alarmist, but definitely not in my backyard, NIMBY. Encasing and burying nuclear waste is a bandage, pushing the problem to future generations. Radioactivity lasts thousands of years. Who can guarantee storage for that long? We're humans, we're fallible, we cannot imagine and address all scenarios. Just ask 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, Mayak, Santa Susana, and it was said that the Titanic was unsinkable. We're playing with fire. Capito supports nuclear energy opportunities for the state in Virginia. So they just passed a law to get rid of the ban on nuclear, and now they're already snuggling up with the nuclear industry immediately. She never wasted one single day. Now they're in talks with the nuclear industry. West Virginia is open for business, right? The original narrative was, well, we're going to get rid of the law and so that the nuclear industry can have a conversation. So as soon as the law passed, everybody wants to build a nuclear reactor there. Does that surprise anybody? She attended a hearing on nuclear energy already. Although the nuclear power industry saw a backlash after the 2014 Fukushima meltdown, it actually happened in 2011. It happened in 2011, not 2014. Charles. So, if you don't know when it happened, you shouldn't be writing the article. How can you make that mistake? Because you're pro-nuclear. As world leaders pledge to avert a climate catastrophe, the nuclear industry sees an opportunity. No, the nuclear industry was the people that got the law changed in the first place. Some are smaller and cheaper. You can't use price as a meter of whether nuclear is good or bad. Wind and solar is cheap too. Prices are dropping while nuclear is always going up. So counting nuclear cheaper is absurd. It's absolutely absurd. I got to go on the species count, Tim, because that's the only way we can have a conversation. We got to prove that there's an issue. Right? I hear what you're saying, but we got to prove that there's an issue. And yeah, we're doomed, but we can get revenge. Right? We need revenge. In other words, we need them held accountable. Is why we do what we do. We know we can't save the species. The research is important because that brings attention to the trouble we're in, and hopefully it brings the wrath of the entire planet down on the nuclear industry. I don't care how we do it, as long as we hold the nuclear industry accountable. And we got to try, right? We can't just say, oh, well, nothing we can do. If we all done that, then there is no future. So we got to do the best we can. We got to try. And if we don't try, what's the point? And who knows, right? We might. And right now we have made a difference. Don't get me wrong. We've made a huge difference. We've got countries after country. We got policymakers. We have investors. Many investors have turned away because of the work that we're doing. We had to prove it, not only to ourselves, of course, but there's a huge decline of students because they've seen my material. And then the apologists, we can't have a future with these apologists on our planet. So we got to do the best we can. I hear you. I understand where you're coming from. You got to look at it through my eyes too. I'm not doing it because it's fun. So it's 1:45 a.m. here in my time. Well, we made it through the show tonight. Not my best, but we made it. And how did we do on the poll? We got 60 votes, which is amazing. We got 88%, but you can see the nuclear industry is seeding the conversation. Should death by radioactive food be a crime? I mean, that's a no-brainer. Of course, death by radioactive food should be a crime. But currently it's not. It's not illegal to poison you with radiation. This is why they murder you in the hospitals. So if you make it a crime to cause people to die, then they can't ship food from a nuclear wasteland and accelerate the genocide. Not only that, then everybody's forced to deal with the truth. And I'll be doing t-shirts. Now, my site, summer this week, everything comes off my merchandise shop, and I'm going to repost everything because I learned how to do it now. I'm better at it, so I can do better front and backs of the t-shirts. And so probably Wednesday or something, the site will go down for a few hours. I'll tear everything off the site, and I'll immediately start posting much better looking material on the site. But for the meantime, link is below my video for my merchandise, where you can buy shirts, Save the Whales, Ban Nuclear Power, Save the Insects, Ban Nuclear Power. There's all kinds of great shirts up there already, and mugs, and jackets, and blankets, and bags, and glasses, all kinds of stuff. I've worked so hard in the last couple of months that it caught up to me, eh? It actually caught up to me. And look, I can make a huge difference if I was given the opportunity. If I had the funding to be able to hire a couple of people for a year and run the operation, I could damage this industry permanently in less than a year. I can destroy the industry if given the right opportunity in less than 1 year. Right? Because now I got a lot of practice at telling the truth and flushing out the lies. And I know who most of the players are now by name and by heart, right? I know that I can really make a difference. And so I'm going to do the best I can. So let's end the poll. I'll give the quick shout out for everybody tonight. And I'll come up to the original comments. Salamanda, Port Angeles, Peaceware. Good night, everybody. Adrian Johnson, Thinker. Good night, everybody. Have a great night, great day tomorrow. I'm probably going to be back in the woods tomorrow. I'm going to have a snowstorm tomorrow night and Tuesday. Hope everybody barks and meow, provoke. Ralph Demout, hey buddy, I bet you're looking forward to spring. You better believe it. It's freezing right now. And so we covered 280 kilometers in the truck. Well, actually more than that. And we covered about 200 kilometers on the bike now in the last 3 days. So that's a hell of a lot of going, right? And just a quick shout out to anybody that finds in the comments section here. Chet Austin, Chuck, and we got to raise a little bit of money. We're flat broke now. That's just the way it goes with research. Costs is a fortune. And James Appleton. And we're not selling many shirts, so we're not making any money over there. Hopefully that changes over the next number of months. James Megan. Hugs for everybody. We're almost through the older comments. I'm getting down to the newest comments in a few moments here. Just doing a quick shout out before we call it a night. Jaffas, Jafas. Good night. If I miss anybody, my apologies. Don Vincent. And we're almost, I keep saying that we're almost there, but Tim Norris. Good night, everybody. Andrew B. Dana Nasana. We're just about caught up. Nancy Sands. Yeah, I hear you, Nancy. I know. Well, this is an educational program, and the truth is important, right? The truth is everything. Without the truth, you got to have someone like me out there, because otherwise it's just the lawyers, right? So I'm a faint light in a universe of lies. And telling the truth is easy. Well, not really. It's a lot of work. You do what I'm doing. But Neread Yolof, yeah, you're welcome. Hugs for everybody. Good night, everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. And there's links at the bottom of the description for people. They can donate $5 or $10 to help out. That'd be a huge deal at this stage. Or there's a merchandise shop below. You can actually buy trinkets and shirts and stuff like that. And I get a tiny cut of that. We'll see everybody soon. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night and a great day tomorrow. Take care. see Colette S. was there. Did I get everybody? I'll read your comments later. Take care, folks.